His country is an African hellhole called Equatorial Guinea. In 10 years, it could be the richest in the world.
Equatorial Guinea has lots of oil and money on paper, making it look rich. But look closer, and you'll see most people there don't see any of this wealth. They're living without the basics. This is the world's best place to live.
This is one bad place. It's had one of the most appalling human rights records.
On paper, Equatorial Guinea is a giant among African nations with its GDP per capita towering over many, painting a picture of immense wealth. This financial muscle comes from a treasure beneath its soil: oil, discovered in the 1990s, which reshaped its economic landscape. Suddenly, this small country was on the world map, attracting international oil companies and a flood of investment, skyrocketing its GDP growth and filling government coffers like never before. But step into Malabo, the nation's capital, and you see where the money seems to flow. Roads that feel too grand for their setting, government buildings that tower with authority, and airports that gleam with the promise of progress. Luxury hotels dot the landscape, beckoning international guests with the allure of opulence. This city's face is meticulously crafted, a showpiece of prosperity and development that the government eagerly displays to the world. Yet this shiny facade masks a starkly different reality for the majority of its citizens, hidden away from these polished streets. This is Equatorial Guinea's paradox, a nation flaunting its wealth while most of its people see none of it. Equatorial Guinea, a nation that epitomizes the paradox of plenty, where a boom in oil and gas reserves catapults its GDP per capita to the top in sub-Saharan Africa, yet fails spectacularly to spread the wealth beyond the clutches of its political elite. A country where the ruling class lives in the lap of luxury with assets that read like a shopping list for the ultra-rich: $220 Paris mansions, 220-foot yachts, and fleets of luxury cars. Yet, step outside the bubble of opulence, and you're met with a starkly different reality. The vast majority grapple with poverty, their lives a world away from the elite's extravagance, with basic amenities like healthcare, education, and clean water remaining elusive dreams. The prevalence of tuberculosis, a telltale sign of poor living conditions, paints a grim picture of the urgent need for public health interventions and a significant uplift in living standards. Dive deeper into the heart of Malabo, the capital, and you'll witness modern infrastructure and amenities designed to dazzle visitors and bolster the nation's image on the international stage. But this showcase development is a mere facade, hiding the grim reality of rural areas plagued by neglect. Agricultural stagnation and a lack of investment in rural productivity further exacerbate food security issues, leaving many to fend for themselves in a country supposedly flush with oil wealth. The government's skewed resource allocation favors urban, politically significant areas, leaving the rural hinterlands in a state of desperate need. This glaring disparity in access to essential services between the urban centers and rural areas not only widens the urban-rural divide, but also highlights a prioritization that benefits a select few at the expense of the many. In a country where the promise of oil wealth became a missed opportunity for widespread prosperity, Equatorial Guinea stands as a stark lesson in the pitfalls of resource-rich economies that fail to harness their wealth for the good of all its citizens. This is a tale of missed connections where the dots of wealth, if properly connected, could paint a picture of national prosperity. Instead, we're left with a jigsaw where the pieces of public welfare, equitable development, and basic human rights simply don't fit. In the heart of Equatorial Guinea, a saga unfolds that could rival any high-stakes drama, with the Obiang family, led by President Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, playing the lead roles. Since the 90s, when oil was discovered and changed the game for this small nation, the Obiangs didn't just get a piece of the pie, they took the whole bakery. Imagine controlling an entire country's oil wealth, with every drop adding to your already overflowing coffers, while the majority of the nation watches from the sidelines, their pockets not getting any deeper. This isn't just local gossip. The world's taken notice. Teodorine Obiang, the president's son, known for his flashy lifestyle straight out of a luxury magazine, has found himself in hot water far beyond his homeland's borders. France and the US have both slapped him with legal actions, seizing assets that scream ill-gotten gains, from a $200 million Paris mansion to a fleet of cars that most can only dream of. Yet, back home, this tale of extravagance casts a long shadow over a population grappling with poverty. The plot thickens with the government's financial wizardry. Or should we say, trickery. Transparency isn't in their vocabulary, leaving the citizens and the wider world guessing where the oil money flows. But one doesn't need to be Sherlock to deduce that it's not into projects that lift the average citizen's living standards. Instead, it's all about skyscrapers, luxury developments, and personal enrichment schemes that serve a select few. Amidst this, voices calling for change, both from within and from the international community, rise like a chorus, demanding accountability, transparency, and a shift in how the nation's wealth is distributed. Yet, as the calls for reform echo, the reality on the ground remains a stark reminder of the power dynamics at play. The contrast between the Obiang family's opulent lifestyle and the daily struggles of the Equatorial Guinean people paints a vivid picture of a nation at a crossroads. Will the wealth ever trickle down? Or will the oil that promised prosperity become a curse that entrenches inequality deeper? Equatorial Guinea's oil-fueled affluence lies a tale of two starkly different worlds, underscored by a Gini coefficient that screams of extreme inequality. This number isn't just a statistic, it's a glaring spotlight on the chasm between the gleaming lives of the elite and the everyday struggle of the majority. The oil boom might have decked the halls of power with opulence, but for the average Joe or Jane, it's as if the boom was a bust. This stark divide has carved out a social hierarchy reminiscent of medieval times, where the elite's lavish lifestyles starkly contrast with the dire circumstances of the general populace, perpetuating a cycle of privilege and neglect. Venture beyond the polished facade of Malibu's urban centers and the reality bites. Healthcare? A tale of two cities, one where the well-heeled navigate a world of private clinics, and another where rural folks grapple with the absence of basic health care, highlighted by alarmingly high infant mortality rates. Education tells a similar story of disparity. Urban kids might have a shot at a decent education, but for their rural counterparts, the lack of schools paints a grim picture of a future tethered to the cycle of poverty. Then there's the elephant in the room, political dissent, or rather, the crushing of it. Speaking out isn't just discouraged, it's dangerous. Activists, journalists, and anyone daring to question the status quo risk everything from harassment to detention in a climate where freedom of speech is as scarce as a unicorn. This iron grip on expression stifles not just voices but progress, leaving critical issues like inequality and access to services festering in the silence. The Obiang family has embarked on a spending spree to deck out its urban landscapes with the kind of infrastructure that would make any wealthy nation nod in approval. But here's the kicker. While millions are poured into gleaming roads, sprawling government palaces, and airports that look like they've leaped out of an architect's glossy brochure, the average Joe in Equatorial Guinea might as well live in a different world. You see, these grandiose projects, though impressive on paper, often serve a dual purpose: to dazzle onlookers and inflate the egos of the elite, rather than to make life better for the people who really need it. Take a stroll through the capital and you're met with the sheen of prosperity, luxury hotels and opulent buildings that scream success. But venture a little further, and the sheen quickly fades to reveal a starkly different picture. Rural areas where the concept of basic infrastructure is as foreign as snow. Schools and hospitals, when they exist, are often a far cry from the needs of the population, struggling under the weight of underfunding and neglect. It's like building a mansion with no running water while the old house crumbles. And then there's the role of international aid. A beacon of hope, you'd think. Yet, this aid often finds itself tangled in a web of government agendas, with questions looming over its effectiveness and reach. Is it really helping those in need, or is it just another layer of polish on the government's facade? Despite the influx of aid aimed at bolstering public services or infrastructure, the impact remains questionable, with tales of mismanagement and diversion not uncommon. So, what's the play here? It's high time for a strategy shift, a call to action for aid that's not just thrown at the government's latest pet project, but directed where it's desperately needed. International oversight and conditional aid could be the game changers, ensuring that help reaches those at the bottom, not just those perched at the top. The goal? To bridge the chasm between the haves and the have-nots, turning oil wealth into a tool for genuine prosperity, not just a facade. Equatorial Guinea sits on a ticking time bomb, not of conflict, but of dwindling oil reserves, a reality that puts its future prosperity on shaky ground. With 1.1 billion barrels of proven oil reserves and a daily production rate that ranks it among the top in Africa, it's easy to see how this nation became intoxicated by the black gold rush. But here's the catch. The global energy landscape is shifting beneath its feet, with renewable energy sources gaining traction and international commitments like the Paris Agreement pushing the world away from fossil fuels. This shift isn't just about saving the planet. It's about economic survival for oil-dependent nations. As the rest of the world zigs towards renewables, Equatorial Guinea's zag into oil dependency could spell trouble. The country's economic heartbeat is synced to the rhythm of oil pumps, with government coffers, public services, and employment heavily reliant on oil revenues. But what happens when the music stops, when the oil wells run dry, or when the world no longer wants what you're selling? This isn't a distant reality, it's a looming threat that calls for immediate action. The path to salvation? Diversification. It's a term thrown around in economic circles, but for Equatorial Guinea, it's a lifeline. Imagine transforming an economy from a one-trick pony into a multifaceted powerhouse, tapping into agriculture, tourism, fishing, and services. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. The roadblocks are many, from entrenched political interests and governance issues to the sheer need for infrastructure and human capital investment. The country needs more than just a plan. It needs a revolution in thought and action. But it's not all doom and gloom. There's a flicker of hope in the form of civil society engagement and international pressure for reform. Grassroots movements, NGOs, and community organizations are beginning to make their voices heard, advocating for economic, social, and political reforms that could steer the country towards a more sustainable and equitable future. The international community, too, is watching, ready to support meaningful change. But will it be enough to turn the tide? Equatorial Guinea stands at a crossroads, with its future prosperity hinging on its ability to adapt, diversify, and embrace the global shift towards sustainable energy sources. The question isn't whether it can afford to change, but whether it can afford not to. Equatorial Guinea, rich on paper but poor in reality, stands at a crossroads. Its oil wealth, while vast, hasn't reached the majority, leaving a nation divided by luxury and need. This tale of missed opportunities underscores the urgent need for diversification and equitable wealth distribution, challenging Equatorial Guinea to transform from the world's best place to live into a truly prosperous nation for all its people. If you found this video enjoyable, I would appreciate it if you could give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell.